Interacting with the DOM is one of my favorite parts about JavaScript. It opens the door to a whole lot of functionality via JavaScript. And the first thing that we need to do in order to start interacting with those elements is selecting elements. And then we can, once we've selected the elements that we want to use, we have the ability to get that element content and manipulate the element information, attributes, styling, and so on. And what JavaScript does is it gives us the ability to change that content in the HTML elements. It allows us to change CSS styling in the HTML elements. We're also able to create interaction. So we're able to set up events and have those events trigger the running of JavaScript code. We can also add and delete HTML elements, and we can really do a whole lot via the DOM and JavaScript. So let's get started in creating some interaction within our web page. So open up your editor, and within our editor, so we've got some really basic HTML here, and the first thing that we need to do is be able to select those elements. So we've got our body tags here, we've got some divs in here, so I should update this to be a body with a y, with a lowercase y, so it's consistent with the rest of the code. And first thing that we need to do is we need to select the element that we want to interact with. So ideally we want to make these as actual buttons and actually make them clickable. So that's what we want to do within this lesson. And I should do a quick update here when we're using CSS, and if we want to access a class, all we have to do is do a period button. And we've also got numerous ways to access our elements via CSS. So if you are familiar with CSS, some of this is going to make a lot of sense to you when we start accessing and selecting elements. So we've got different ways to select elements. We can select it via our ID, we can select it via tag, and we can also traverse down, so we can select out the parent and then select out the children of the parent and move all the way down, so we can look at the descendants and make selections that way as well. So much like we're selecting particular elements, so if I wanted to select this button in CSS, I would do a hashtag, then I would select button 1, so I'd select the name, and then I'd enter in some properties. So if I want to set the background color or something like that, then we can really easily do that once we've actually made our selection of our element. And when I refresh it, we see we've got the changes taking place. So it's the same idea when we're selecting elements using JavaScript. So if we want to select that same element, or if we want to select a different one, all we have to do is identify it within the HTML code. And one of the easiest ways to identify it is to simply grab it and assign a variable value to it. So we're going to do, and we're going to grab it via the ID. So document. So we're selecting that document object, and in JavaScript, again, when we select objects, we can select down particular and attach particular methods to those objects. And the one that we're going to be using is getElementById. And then all we have to do in here is we have to set up that ID and identify it. And so what happens now is that if I console log out the my output variable and just save that and refresh it, we're going to open up our console so you can see all of the information that's contained within here. So we go to console and we actually see that it's just selecting that element information. So if we do, instead of document log, if we do document directory, this will give us a better idea of the contents of this particular element and all the DOM interactions that we can have. So we've got the same thing that we had looked at earlier, where we've got all of these events that we can attach to it. We can traverse through, so we can see the next sibling, we can see the parent, we can see the first child. There's a lot of information that we can get out here. So one that we're going to look at first is we're going to look at this inner text or inner HTML. So we see that it contains that exact same content that's available inside of there. So now that we've assigned a variable to there, we can update that value by doing my output and inner HTML, and we can apply a brand new value to it. So for now, we're just going to type new button and refresh this, and we see that we immediately updated the content in here. So even when we go into our HTML code, we see that the content has now been updated. So all of this content gets updated via JavaScript. So the first run through, it runs through, it sets the content in the HTML. When it comes to the JavaScript, it says, okay, we're getting this element by ID, we're putting in the new variable, my output is going to contain all of this object information, and that gives us the ability to interact with that object and set that inner HTML. Now this is the same thing we can do with inner text, and the difference between inner text and inner HTML is, of course, that inner text displays out all of your content as text, and if we do inner HTML and refresh it, we can see that it actually runs through and renders it out as HTML. So we have that line break, that BR tag within there, and it's actually rendering it out as a new line. So in the next lesson, we're going to look at how to make selections in other ways. So maybe we don't want to use IDs, we don't want to have to assign IDs to every single element, maybe we want to use classes. So I'm going to show you how to do that in the upcoming lesson.